Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Renee Miller, and I'm the program manager for the OBI, and I'm so glad to have you with us today. Welcome to this educational program on managing stress and performance for startups and high-performing teams. You may notice that our format is a little bit different this time. At the bottom of your screen should be a chat icon and a Q&A icon. So please feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat, and I see some of you have been doing that already. When you have a question for the speaker, please use the Q&A to ask your questions, and we'll be doing Q&A throughout the presentation as well as at the end. And now to get us started, I want to offer a land acknowledgement. OBI and Otradi would like to acknowledge the land we are all on, wherever we may be. Otradi conducts business throughout Portland and beyond, and is making an effort to acknowledge the history of the area and work towards decolonization of the bioscience industry. Portland rests on the traditional village sites of the Multnomah, Cathlamet, Clackamas, Chinook, Tualatin, Kalapoya, Molalla, and many other tribes who have made their homes along the Columbia River. So please join us in acknowledging the land we are all on throughout Oregon and beyond. To learn more about Portland's native, diverse, and vibrant community, please read Leading with Tradition. It's a document created by the Portland Indian Leaders Roundtable, and there will be a link to it in the chat box. And now it's time to introduce our speaker, Sourabh Kothari. He's a Portland-based entrepreneur and co-founder of Mindcurrent, a data science platform for team performance and well-being. For over 25 years, he's built high-performing teams for the world's largest brands across North America and Asia. His programs at Cisco were nominated for 2 Emmy Awards and delivered some of the company's highest ROI. We are very pleased to have him with us here today. So please welcome Sourabh for today's presentation. And if you have questions for him, please type them into the Q&A box. Sourabh, if you're ready, you may have the floor.
Thank you, Renee. I'll just start sharing here. Oh, looks like you'll need to help me enable my screen sharing. For some reason it says it's disabled, though I'm a panelist, Renee.
Can you share it now?
Yes, I can.
All right.
Hey, everyone. I will be coming on and off of video based on the bandwidth as we go through the presentation, but I'll try my best to always be on video during the Q&A. As you'll see in part of our discussion, you don't always have to be on video. It's actually good sometimes to just be on audio. All right. Earlier this year, in May, my father beat COVID in a hospital in India. After a week of struggling to breathe, he actually became COVID negative and was relieved. The next day, he had a heart attack and passed away. And I am not alone in this experience. Unfortunately, this has become a very common story. So many of us have lost a parent, a grandparent, a sibling, a friend, and some people have even lost their children, which is devastating, and I can't even imagine that. And as we move through this terrible ordeal, it's also worth noting that for some of our colleagues and some of our friends, the past 12 months have actually been the best year of their professional career. They've worked from home, they've spent more time with family, their health is actually improved. And some of them, their businesses, their companies, especially startups in the healthcare and in the e-commerce space, for 2 examples, They haven't grown 10x in the past 12 months, they've grown 50x. Extraordinary opportunities. So with such diverse lived experiences across teams, I mean, is it even feasible for teams to function at this point, the way that we're working? Does it even make sense to have teams at all when everyone is in such a different place? Well, that's what we're going to examine today, is how your teams perform, and we're going to do it with data, lots of data, which I hope you enjoy, and I hope you can ask questions looking at this data about your own organization and your team's performance, or lack thereof, if that's what you're dealing with. Now, before we jump into that, the best practices for teams that are high performing, or teams, say, at startups that have to grow very quickly, I'd like to go into the data and take a step back, right? Let's go back in time, maybe even further back than the 18 months that we've all experienced, and actually go back 4 years. For those of you that work in people analytics, either on the operations or as an executive or in the HR function, you'll know Willis Towers Watson. They were going to merge and become the largest insurance company in the world, but that merger did not go through. They're still the 5th largest insurance company in the world. Beyond that, they are an incredible source of analytics for workforce and performance, and especially compensation and benefits. 4 years ago, they were starting to raise the red flag around mental health and performance, specifically around stress and anxiety. But I want to bring your attention to a specific piece of how this was framed. Over the past 2 years, in 2017, they're saying from their surveying of thousands of professionals that over the past 2 years before they took that survey, these professionals, 30% of them had suffered from severe stress or anxiety. That's a very long time frame within which to check a box that, yes, I did experience this. Let's look at what Gallup has done with some massive surveying work they did last year, where they're saying more than 70% are now struggling on pretty much a daily basis. 80% are not engaged, and many of you are leaders in the live audience. You know this, that's why you're here, is because you want to help your teams with that exact issue. Some of you may actually be looking for other roles, maybe here to network, because you're not engaged at all. You're part of the 80% that are done. You want out, you want to jump, to use that term. And of course, the financial implications is not what we're talking about today, but it's disastrous, right? To businesses, to economies, to entire sectors. Before we get into the specifics of performance data on teams and even on individuals at different levels in the organization, I'd like us to also be aware of this moment in time. I know there's a lot of commentary of what things will be like after COVID, but if you look at, again, 2 of the best firms that are surveying and producing data in the field, again, Willis Towers Watson and Gallup, more recently, they're both pretty much sure we are in the middle of it. We're not near the end. We are experiencing tremendous amounts of change and stress and anxiety and difficulty across our teams and organizations as we move from a pandemic, a global pandemic, where we die from COVID, to an endemic, where we live with COVID, but still don't have 100% of our normal sort of pre-COVID life back. Very important to make note of this, that if you're seeing attrition, if you've already lost 5 to 10% of your staff, you should continue to expect that through now and until the end of next year, that this is not the beginning of the end. Now, we're going to dive into some specific data, and I wanted to let you know, since I expect none of you know Mindcurrent, we are a startup and we've been in research, in stealth actually, for 2 years. But we've collected a tremendous amount of data comparable to the multi-billion-dollar organizations I was showing earlier, because we've been doing this over 2 years across 25,000 beta users in 40 countries. And Mindcurrent operates within a Teams Slack or Microsoft Teams channel. So our engagement, our daily data collection with privacy and confidentiality, right? We work on aggregate data. Our daily engagement is very high. It's a lot higher than, say, an app where someone has to stop what they're doing to go to an app, or an EAP website where you have to schedule something. We're there every day and we're able to engage with teams once or more, sometimes multiple times a day. So please keep that in mind when we go through this data. After we look at some of this detailed data, which I hope fosters a number of questions and thoughts about your own organization and what your strategy is, what your practices are, what your rituals are, which we'll talk about, we're going to pause and just take 2 or 3 questions, and then we'll go through the rest of the presentation. So the first thing we want to do is break out what we saw earlier. What is stress? And specifically about work, what are people doing? As you can see on the far left, the stress, as far as frequency, we're basically saying 2/3 of people are stressing multiple times each week. I won't read all the graphs because you can see them clearly. And what's very, very interesting, I want you to just take a second. I live this, we work in this every day, but I want you to take a second to look at some correlations here. The stress that teams are experiencing now is somewhat inverted when it comes to manager and coworker dynamics. Normally, you see managers as a more prominent key stress factor than coworkers, and even more so than customers. In fact, that's just your lot in life. If you're a manager or a leader, right? You're always labeled as the problem. And if you don't like that, then you shouldn't be in leadership. But that's pretty much normal when we're collecting data. Yeah, over the past 6 months, that's changed. There's severe stress, severe dysfunction, and we'll talk about it in the rest of this Lunch and Learn. And that has made coworkers, frankly, almost twice as high as managers, with the clear leader being workload. However, you're going to see this when we get into the behavioral analytics a little further. Look at the measurement for how people judge their workload. Is your workload manageable? More than 40%, yeah, they agree, it is manageable. And a few even strongly agree. And then there's a large section who don't really know. But the number of people that disagree, who are saying their workload is not manageable, is not even a quarter of all of the users. Yet look at how they balance work with the rest of their life, right? Clearly, they are not balancing work well. So the workload is impacting them, but we've got to a point where teams are just accepting that. And you're going to see how this is having a psychological and a physiological effect on your team members. This is what we call an unhealthy ritual. You have not asked your team to make poor decisions about their health or their behavior for your work. Most of you, I'm pretty sure, have never done that. They have chosen to do so, making it a ritual. And we'll examine why they're choosing these unhealthy rituals and why many of us in this conversation are doing the same. Before that, let's look at the rest of life. Work is only one part of life, right? And what's interesting here is that bodies and health, physical body and health and pain or lethargy or just being stressed, feeling stressed, is now secondary to mental stress, right? People have become very aware that they are struggling to focus, that they're having thoughts that they have not had before about their work, about their coworkers, about their partners. And stress is almost at 15%, which is where we really start to get concerned in every category that's measured on the personal basis. How often people stress about their personal life hasn't changed that much from before. But what's really interesting is that you still see more than half of your team does not believe that their life is spilling into their work. And there's a huge awareness issue there. Of course, your life is spilling into your work. And of course, it's impacting your job. So much so that as we move through this, you're considering leaving your job. Some of you are considering changing your careers, right? We'll see why. Let's get into the nitty-gritty, okay? Most, right, more than 50% of folks that we work with and have worked with in the past believe that they're getting enough sleep. Statistically, when we look at the actual numbers, they're not. If 45% of people are getting 6 or fewer hours of sleep, they are not sleeping enough. Not any particular day, not on the weekend, they're not sleeping enough. And as you'll see when we talk about caffeine, they're compensating for that pretty directly. right? However, look at the response about being able to focus. Again, that's a very intentional approach. You're saying you're able to focus because you really want to, yet you are very, very tired, right? We've got about a third of people agreeing that they've got the energy to get through the day. Most of us do not feel like that. Some of you might be smiling when you look at something titled exercise. Like, dude, are you for real? You know, I'm like barely sleeping, I'm barely eating. But that's not how we're going to thrive, right? We have to get back to movement on a daily basis, even if you wouldn't call it exercise, getting up and walking around your house for 5 or 10 minutes, walking outside and doing nothing, just standing outside and looking at the sky and and at the grass, right? That's movement. But one thing that's really important to look at here is that despite the availability of time, the frequency of exercise is nowhere near where you would need for a healthy team and for healthy individuals. One good thing we're noticing is that walking is coming back a lot. The numbers for walking were lower before, and cycling has gone up again. For those of you that are by or invested in some of the latest at-home cycling solutions, it is definitely having an impact. Okay, this is an area that very few people talk about, frankly, because there's very little data across teams about nutrition. Most companies don't know how to ask these questions. And again, you don't want to do this in longer surveys. It's easier when you have this day-to-day engagement like we do. It's a single question here and there. So most people do believe, more than 50% do believe they've maintained healthy eating habits, regardless of their weight going up or down 10 to 20 pounds. And not everyone's gone up. Some people have gone down 10 or more, or 20 pounds or more. And we're not seeing something we had seen a little earlier. There's been a reversal in how much people are ordering food, which is the absolute worst option. If you don't even get out of your house, let alone making your own meals or even heating it up, if you don't even get out of your house to go get your food, then the food is coming to you. It's just being consumed. It's essentially an afterthought. Unfortunately, statistically, food that's delivered is generally the lowest in nutritional value and will have longer term impact on your sleep, especially, but also your performance and your overall health, especially if you're not exercising. That's a killer combination. I order all my food delivered to me and I don't move, more than 30 minutes a day. That's really dangerous for you. Caffeine over there on the right. It is concerning that we now have more than a quarter of people consuming 3 or more cups of coffee, but we know why. It's because they're not getting enough quality sleep. And we'll look at the rituals that employees and team members have adopted, which is actually reducing their sleep. Why is that happening? The one I really want to point out, and this is where behavioral psychology is really powerful, is why the heck aren't people drinking water? If you look right in the middle there, very, very troublesome, the amount of water that people are consuming now. It was higher before, even during the pandemic. And we'll talk about one of the reasons why that's happening, especially if you work at a tech company, a biotech company, healthcare, or in professional services, where you spend a certain amount of time doing this, engaging with people via virtual meetings or live broadcasts. So if I forget, Renee, bring me back to the water question. It is part of one of the practices we'll look into specifically. Now, before we go further, because that's a ton of data, and we're going to switch gears and talk about performance and practices and why things have gotten to where they are, how you can start to turn, how you can start to build better practices, and how to approach this with teams at different levels. But before we do that, I would like to pause, Renee, and I know I have one question already that I can see, but if there's other questions, or if we want to wait to get some questions, Renee, or if you have any, I'd like to take a couple of questions now for just a few minutes, if that's okay.
Thank you so much. I don't see any questions in the Q&A.
Okay.
I can scroll through the chat and see if there's any questions for you there. If anybody has questions for Sourabh, please put it in the Q&A box.
I'm going to go ahead while they're doing that, Renee, and answer the one question we get asked all the time
Okay.
about the data, which is, can I get this data? That's the number one question. And I believe Renee and her team does a fantastic job getting these webinars and lunch and learn sessions out. So you should have access to this in the presentation after the fact. But the question we also get after that is, can I get this data for my own team? How do I collect and calculate this data for my team? And I have actually, Renee, we've made it really, really simple. You can just drop your email on our website. And when you do that, you will get access to a free 30-day trial for Mindcurrent. And you can use that to build this data set for your team, either via Slack or Microsoft Teams. So I just wanted to answer that proactively because we get asked that a lot. What would the data for my team look like and the various teams that I might be overseeing? Cool. If there are no questions right now, Renee, then I would like to move forward and see how much time we can save towards the end for a longer Q&A at the end of the session.
Sounds good. Thanks.
You're welcome. Feel free to interrupt me at any point if you'd like. Okay, so we work with teams of very different sizes, and not every company is in a single Slack or Teams channel that we support. Some have multiple channels, and so we're supporting different teams. And also our clients are of different sizes and in different industries. So when it comes to performance factors, over the last 2 years, we've analyzed 108, but we operate on pretty much a dozen from an operational perspective, unless it's a specific use case. And when it comes to the recommendations that we provide these every day to clients in the channels, and we get feedback, and then we get into dialogue, either with users or with management. I had to pick only a few, so I've picked 3 today. If you'd like to talk about others specific to your team, what you're struggling with, just ping me and let me know. This is what we do, right? So the number one, I actually thought we'd take this in the order of severity. What are the performance factors that are causing the greatest risk to your organization? And not just your organization's performance, but even your organization's existence. If too many of your top performers leave, your growth will go, and then you will actually be in trouble of just being able to find talent with gaps in your operational effectiveness. I worked at 2 startups before before I started Mindcurrent. One's a unicorn and the other IPO'd earlier this year. And we've seen this. We've seen when we've grown to a certain point, and now we don't have the key person that we needed. Wish we had seen that 6 months earlier. So the first thing I'm going to cover here, and again, we won't read the slides, is it's very, very important right now in talking with users remotely and also through one-on-one interviews, that it's very clear to each of your team members what their role is, not their task. This is one of the number one things that's holding teams back from automating right now. There's been a tremendous opportunity to automate workflows and to embrace a remote working culture, but people have been struggling with this because they're not clear what their role is on their team or their organization. They're very focused on the task or tasks that they do. If you don't know what your role is, you don't know the ROI of your position, what your role's worth to your company or organization. So therefore, you can't step back and say, you know what, I could cut 30% of my workload down if we were to use this other solution, because you believe it's your job to just do those tasks, and the solution that would help you actually looks like competition. This is really important right now because a lot of people feel like they're on a hamster wheel and they're going through tasks that seem almost meaningless, which brings us over to purpose, which I'll get to in just 30 seconds here. The second thing around role is to move away from quarterly performance. And actually, from our perspective, our clients are working on weekly progress and weekly feedback, not even monthly. The reason for this is twofold. You don't have enough certainty. Nobody does. You don't have enough certainty to set quarterly goals that you have a high degree of confidence will play out the way you think, right? There's just too much changing. So if you're able to be honest and open and humble with your team, which gets us over to trust under purpose, then you'll find that you need to pull your goals back. You need to pull your measurement and alignment and progress back to things that people are achieving each week. And each month, you're then assessing what is the next goal or milestone, and has the measurement or the yardstick changed because of circumstances that are not at all due to the team member. Doing this builds fantastic dialogue and gets you that third bullet point, which is adaptability. When you show your team that you are working with them instead of them working for you, the trust and transparency aligns with adaptability. They're willing to be upfront, and tell you, we're not going to hit this target. And it's not a matter of blame. I'm telling you for a fact, we're not going to hit this target, but we've gotten over it as a team. We've cried our tears. Here's what we think we should do instead. That is an adaptable team. Frankly, that's kick-ass. That's what you want. That's high performance. When your team is feeding leading indicators, what is going to happen for your business, back to you as management and leadership. Lastly, if you haven't been doing so, please do now. And think of this as something you can do in the rest of September. Take a real good look back at your values as an organization, bring them back to single sentences, no more than 5, and talk. Do not broadcast this. You need to get away from throwing things at your team and have a dialogue. Talk to your management, talk to your teams, and let them talk to theirs about those values. How are we living up to those values as an organization? What do we need to do to change? Okay. If we don't do this as leaders, then the opportunities in each of our sectors are ripe. There are thousands of jobs that some of you are looking for, and many of your team members are looking for, as I'm sure many of you read in the very famous report that Microsoft, LinkedIn, and Edelman produced very thoroughly on sentiment data from LinkedIn analysis. The second and probably the most practical performance factor that you can do to change performance right now across remote teams, especially those experiencing growth, is to change the way you communicate. So a few things, and this is all in sequence, they work together. Instead of hour-long meetings, where the whole point of the meeting is simply to communicate, no major decision is being made. And weekly staff meetings are a good example. Update meetings are a good example. These are meetings that could be an email. I'm not being facetious, they really could. Or if you're a little bit more sophisticated, your leader could record a 2 or 2.5 minute video using Zoom and send it to everybody. And everyone provides their updates to the leader before they do that. There you go, there's the update. Now what we can do is meet on the 2 or 3 things we have to decide on after the update. But the point here is not how long your meetings are. It's that you want to meet or you want to connect and have dialogue more frequently. Again, because change is too fast to manage right now. Thinking that you will have an update each month, you won't. You'll be coming back each month to re-strategize. And if you haven't experienced that already, you should be, for things that are critical for your business. When it comes to communicating, and if you are in a senior level, I'm looking over here on the right, you've got to demonstrate better communication rituals and practices. You can't ask your team to communicate better. Please, if you're doing that, just stop. Hey, here's a great article on how we can communicate better. Please don't do that. Please, right? Use what's in the article. And if someone asks why we're changing, here's where I've got the research from. This is what's working for other organizations that are growing quickly, right? Another thing I would like to point out here is that along with uncertainty, trust has been eroded dramatically because a lot of leadership over the past year or two have not been willing to admit that they don't know, and especially that they don't know what they don't know. So because of that, it's really hard to engage your teams in larger groups. The more the uncertainty, the smaller the group you want to engage with, because that creates that security or intimacy that will allow for team members to speak up And the dynamic of the engagement, even if it's a 30-minute dialogue, is better suited for feedback and listening, okay? Which is the number one important communication tool right now for all of us, is not presenting, is not speaking better or writing better. It's just simply listening. A last thing, if you do need to meet with an individual and it's just one-on-one and you work with them on a regular basis, don't use Zoom or Teams at all. Each of us has a phone within our smartphone. Call them. Have the conversation on the phone. You'll find that it's much easier to hang up after 17 minutes or 32 minutes, or to walk around while you're talking with someone one-on-one, than it is to be that flexible and transparent when you're doing a scheduled meeting. For those of you looking for tips, if you are using Zoom, I've got Adam Grant's entire 4-step process there. Last performance factor, and then I'll sum up just briefly, Renee, and then I'd like to save the rest of the time for Q&A, or folks have specific examples in their industry or organization they're dealing with, is culture. This is the biggest differentiator. And we have seen this with some of our clients who have had changes in their top leadership. Some have had a huge evolution of culture. It's literally saved their company by intentionally replacing some of their leadership. Others have been just unintentionally blessed with leaders that have come in that have really taken the time to address toxic toxic elements in the existing culture. Okay, I'm going to take a little bit of time here, if that's okay, because I don't think this dialogue happens often enough, especially among startups, tech companies, medical companies, or professional services. We all feel sometimes we're too professional to talk about this, which is absolute nonsense. If you look at other countries that are actually either more, that are either less developed economically than the United States, or as developed, and that are outpacing our growth, it's because they have actually successfully normalized human bodily needs. There are cultures that are very openly addressing what you need as a person, as a human, and addressing that first in your role and your job. Then we'll get to your KPIs, right? Okay, so we talked about this earlier. Team members are not drinking enough water. I'm going to use this as an example, as an unhealthy ritual. It's a ritual because it's something that they are doing themselves. They've practiced it, and it's very familiar to them. And what I mean by this is, we saw this across a few of our clients, and we had the opportunity to interview some of the folks that were struggling with this, and then to interview leadership. You might be surprised why people on your teams working remotely aren't drinking enough water, because it's an endless supply, right? The number one reason is so that they don't have to get up to go to the bathroom. And for those of you that are laughing, let it sink in. That is a horrible, horrible situation. If your team does not want to take 3 minutes to use the restroom during the day, something is very, very wrong with their expectations of how they enjoy work, or what success means to work on that team. But they're not drinking water because they don't want to get up for the next 2-3 hours, because they're going, as we all call it, back to back. How do we counter this? I'm being very, very direct with you in this. If you are a leader or a manager, please, if you don't mind doing it now, and if you do it, if you don't mind putting your hand up in the Zoom, I'd like you to do this with me. In a meeting where you are on camera, start the meeting by doing this. Take a sip of water. Take 15 seconds to do that. Show your team you're doing that. Don't apologize for it, you're drinking water. Just doing it will promote the idea. Basic social psychology, right? It'll make those who are thirsty want to drink water. The next step for you in building a healthy ritual just around hydration is to end your meeting 5 minutes early and to declare to your team, I'm going to go refill my water, step outside for a minute because I need just to clear my head. I think you should do the same if you've got a couple of minutes. And then, I'll see you at the next meeting. Likewise, I'd like to get to that last bullet point, which is what's really killing people's sleep. And for many people, it has sucked the joy out of their work, which is that there's no end to their day. If you actually talk to individuals that are really struggling with this across teams, you'll find there's no start to their day either. They don't have a clear start or a clear end. As a leader, what do you do? Okay? First of all, my personal request to you, please do not send a message out telling people that I don't expect you to respond at night, okay? Because what you've just done now is ask them to change behavior without a clear incentive. Again, the right way to set a ritual, demonstrate it. Something we call silent night. When you are going to send a message, and now you as a high performer have in your calendar a 15-minute block every workday where you end work. You may not end work entirely at that point, but you will end 80% of your work. And most importantly, your communications with your team, with customers, or with managers, you will end at that point. It could be 6 p.m., it could be 5, whatever it is based on your family and your personal needs. It's a good thing to get this in your calendar, just like you should for the beginning of your work. When you log off in your Slack or Microsoft Teams channel, log off and tell people, just like you would if you were working in the office. When you're leaving the office and you walk past your team and you're heading out, what do? You don't put your head down and just tunnel out and leave, right? That's a very odd way to end your day, and your team will get concerned. You let people know, hey, great work today, guys. I'll see you tomorrow. And maybe as a joke, I'll bring donuts. It's a joke. You don't bring donuts. It's unhealthy, right? But you sign off and you let your team know. Doing that in Slack and in Teams is really, really powerful. Hey, folks, I'm signing off now, right? I'll be back in the morning. If there's anything you need, just shoot it in, right? But I won't respond till the morning. Hope you guys have a great night. And keep doing this. Signing off now, okay? You're normalizing that you stop working, and you're doing it publicly in a channel, which means your team members that are so inclined can start doing it with their teams. They can start doing it with each other. I'm off the clock now. I'll be back on at a particular time. But unless you're going to text me or call my cell phone, you shouldn't expect that I'm responding. Why is this really important? If you don't transition out of work at the end of the day, you're going to have a very hard time getting restful sleep. And I want to take this for just a minute. It's not about the ability to fall asleep quickly. It's about the ability to get into deep sleep, restorative sleep. This is the first 2 hours of your sleep cycle where your body regenerates and your brain processes what you've done throughout the day, creates long-term memories. It's not in the middle of the night, it's the first 2 hours. If you don't transition to out of active work, to family life, and then to a slower pace before you sleep, you don't get regenerative sleep, which means even if you sleep 6 or 7 hours, you don't wake up feeling fresh. We've got to bring our routines back. Demonstrating these routines to our teams is the #1 way to ask them to do the same without mandating. Okay. Last thing I do want to touch on, because it's a much longer conversation around inclusion, and I think we could take that offline for those of you who have efforts in your organization already focused on this. I think many of you are familiar with the study 5 years ago by Google on what makes an awesome team. There are 5 things that they identified. The top of the list, to break through performance, to truly do things that no one in the industry is doing, you need something called psychological safety. And for those of you that don't work in behavioral psychology or performance psychology, very simply put, psychological safety is the communal agreement of an agreed upon risk. We are going to take some risks, and we've all agreed to that. And that is perfectly fine. In fact, that's normal. It's what we do. An environment in which you can do this, think about your family, your siblings. It's a great example. Hey, we're all going to do this. Yep, it could go to shit, but we're going to do this because we know each other and we trust each other, and it's all good. That feeling, that's psychological safety, right? For teams that are high performing, it is critical to have this. But I do want to point out, guys, it's almost impossible to achieve that right now for remote teams, given the stress levels, if you don't have the foundations we're talking about earlier, because it's just too hard for people to visualize what failure could do to the team, their career, or the company. When you have psychological safety, one of the things you do is you set a time frame for the risk. We're going to try this for this long, and if it doesn't work, we'll do this. You don't just say you're going to take a chance. We all agree we're going to take a risk, do it for this long. Doesn't work, we're going to do this. Everybody agrees, then you transparently execute on it. If it works out, great. Just encourage everyone to do it again. We desperately need that type of high performance back, which is why I took the time today to walk you guys through the fundamentals and the data behind everything before which you can start to approach psychological safety and high performance. Renee, I'll stop there. I could provide some next steps, but I actually would prefer if folks would like suggested reading, or if there's some thought leaders they'd like to follow. I'd be happy to share that if they want to connect with me by email or even on LinkedIn. There's too many books, great books on these topics that I could suggest. So instead of making a slide, I thought, you know what, I'll give an open offer. You can ask me and I'll point you to some great thought leaders.
Excellent. Thank you so much. This was great information.
Thank you.
We do have a question in the Q&A. Mary Phillips has asked, why are people stressing more about their coworkers?
Oh, that's a great question. I actually stopped sharing, if that's okay, Renee.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, because we didn't want to say this, but I actually wanted to show it. You'll note that it's actually much less straining on all of us now in the Zoom without the screen share, because you're not compelled to read something. So I thought we'd do the rest of the session this way, just us, audio or video. So the stress around coworkers has been escalating over the past 6 months. If we were to look back from February, March onwards, and there are a few things that are driving it. It's also some of the fundamental reasons that are driving it for couples. Not to say that you're married to your team, but some of the factors are the same. The main thing that teams are struggling with and their frustration with coworkers is nobody is giving concrete answers. Nobody is sticking to schedules. We've all had norms that were built on routines in the past where we could depend on certain team members for certain things. A lot of that is gone. Meetings, projects, goals are spun up, and then you don't hear about it. And a lot of this is because we don't meet in person. Nobody feels as accountable as they used to before. How do we counter this? I think we've talked about this to death. Demonstrated as a leader that we have these goals and these are the only things I need you to work on. If you're done with your progress this week on this goal, then take Friday off, right? Accountability has been completely diminished due to the lack of physical and regular contact. You don't have to work together. Two of the startups I worked with before, we had remote teams. And like I said, one's a unicorn, one went public. Super, super successful. But we had time we would spend together. And one thing we would do that I think is really important, then we'll switch to the next question, Renee, is that we used to share stories. Two of the most inspirational CEOs I've worked with, one mentored me and encouraged me to start Mindcurrent, are the masters of the personal short story. They'll use a personal short story in less than 2 minutes to make a point crystal clear, and it opens the room and the dialogue for everyone else to share their experiences, which means when we honor each other's stories, we have added a value to your life, in my perspective. I don't just value your story or shared memory. When I respond and say, that's amazing, you're amazing. I value you. That pretty much gone. We work with clients on this regularly, is you've got to start some of your more important meetings or regular larger meetings. You've got to start with 5 minutes of small talk and let folks know that we're going to start in a few minutes. Until then, I want to share something. And if you want to share something, go ahead.
Great, thank you so much. Well, I would say that the most interesting parts of this talk for me was just the simple having a phone call instead of having a Zoom meeting. How simple is that? That's what we always used to do. And now everything is Zoom, it's on camera, and we do get camera fatigue, absolutely. Also, I like the whole idea about silent night. I think that's important to know that when the workday is done, the workday is done. Some folks, there's a very large employer in the area who's known for this. My husband worked for them for 25 years. They pretty much expect you to work around the clock. And it's hard. It's hard on people.
Well, there's something about that, Renee, for just 30 seconds. You know, when an organization overtly declares that, they're actually doing you a solid. When they say, we're all going to work the next 6 weekends, I've done this, by the way, not just at startups, at one of the largest tech companies in the world. We agreed to work every day for 6 weeks, but it was optional. The team that was doing this cross-functionally was doing it. Nobody else had to do it. And we were not celebrated for doing that. It was a demonstration of how terrible the situation was that we had to do that. We took time off. Everyone got 3 days off for doing it. It's not commensurate, but we chose that. We got 3 days off. When you overtly say, hey, you know, I'm going to expect you to do things whenever they have to get done because it's a do or die, we have to do it, then you've done your team a solid because they can actually choose to leave. It's not an uncertainty. As they have children, as they develop hobbies, as they want to live more of their life, they can say, well, I know that things won't change here. We openly declare that. I'm out. It's much worse when leaders keep doing it and never say it. You don't know if, you know, can I change him? Can I make him a better man? Right? No, you can't. You're still probably going to find, you know, a better working condition somewhere else.
Good point. We have another question in the Q&A. Heather says, I'm lucky that my team is open to sharing their personal experiences and are invested in one another. If that's not the case for a team, where do you recommend starting to create this culture?
Oh, so such a good question. Give me just 10 seconds, Heather. I want to give you the short answer. It'll start with the thing we had, I think, on the practice around clarity. It'll start by setting concrete goals for the team that are extremely short term. If you can recognize what each person is responsible for achieving, and we incrementally keep tabs on each other and support each other to do that each week, what you're not asking your team to care more about each other, but they will. Because when we get into the trenches and I write an email copy because you can't today, right? And then you review my data because something's wrong and I don't know what it is, right? When you start to do that, you've opened the door for the next step. I'm just talking about the first step, Heather, just that. Set short-term incremental goals with transparency for each person's incremental progress each week and make it openly understood that we will help each other to get there. The second step is to then start having people talk about what they've learned in the process, and that opens up personal storytelling and sharing.
Great, thank you. While we wait for any other questions, I'm just going to launch a quick post-program survey. This will pop up on your screen. We ask this at the end of each of our Lunch and Learns so that we can get feedback on our own programs. And while we wait for any other questions, Sourabh, thank you so much. This is great information and presented in a different kind of way with a lot of data behind it, which we all really appreciate.
Thank you. Renee, I I think all of us, I don't think we say this to you enough, you and Heather and the whole team, we're all really grateful. One of the most amazing things about being in Portland and the greater Portland area is that even though we're all really focused on business, and now a lot of us are focused on tech specifically, right? I think we're really good at this. I think we're really good at having human conversations and helping each other out. I rarely, if ever, hear people say no when I ask for help in Portland. And so I just want to extend my gratitude. Thank you for creating this forum. I think there's probably going to be quite a bit of dialogue after this conversation, and that's thanks to you guys. Thank you.
Thank you. I think so too. I think Portland is a great ecosystem for people helping one another. It feels very collaborative around here. Any other questions or comments? I see lots of chat going through here. But if anybody has any other questions, please put it in the Q&A. And if there are no other questions, we'll wrap up in just a few minutes. I want to let you know that we've got a few events coming up. We've got October 7th is our next happy hour. And then October 14th, we have a lunch and learn on understanding the investor mindset. And Sarah put a very helpful link to these events in the chat. Thank you, Sarah. Thanks for helping out behind the scenes. Thank you, Sourabh, for everything. This is a great presentation. And the recording will be made available to participants, and I will send them to you in your email tomorrow, along with a copy of the slide deck. And we just sure appreciate everyone joining us today. And I hope to see you at another event soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.